Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
I first saw Sierra on a crisp autumn morning, her silhouette framed by amber light filtering through the cafe window. She was radiant, her posture confident, eyes alight with ambition. When our gaze met, I felt a curious pull, a mixture of admiration and longing. In that moment, I knew I wanted more than a passing conversation. Over coffee, we talked about careers, dreams, and the small tragedies that shape a person's path. At the time, I had no inkling of the complexities marching behind her smile. A few weeks later, Sierra invited me to dinner at her parents' house. The invitation felt significant, tender yet tinged with vulnerability. As I stepped through the front door, rich smells of southern cooking filled the air. Laughter echoed down the hallway. Sierra's mother greeted me with warmth, her eyes kind but curious. Sierra's father offered a respectful nod. There was an unspoken question in their gaze. Who was this man claiming space in their daughter's life? Later, Sierra pulled me aside in a quiet corner of the hallway, her voice soft. "There's someone important you haven't met," she said. My heart raced as she led me through a pair of French doors into a small bedroom. A little girl with curly hair and bright eyes peeked over a pile of stuffed animals. She was silent, curious, cautious. Sierra whispered her name, Hallie. My heart clenched. She was 4 years old, the daughter of a man named Jalen who had vanished when love turned to ruin. Sierra's confession fell into the warm air. Hallie had been raised by her grandparents ever since that bitter fallout. I remember the moment I realized choice mattered more than circumstance. I looked at Hallie's uncertain expression, at Sierra's hesitant resolve. I saw not a complication but a testament to survival, resilience forged through pain and loss. Sierra looked at me, searching my face. I reached out gently, placed a hand on Hallie's shoulder, and smiled. "If we're serious," I said, voice steady, "I won't just love you. I'll step up for Hallie too." Love was a promise, but loyalty was a choice. And in that choice lay the foundation of my seat at their table. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in fatherhood lessons. I learned the small rituals of care. Preparing pancakes with just the right dollop of syrup, tucking blankets around sleepy shoulders, listening to Hallie whisper imaginative stories in half-formed sentences. Each moment built trust brick by brick, heart by heart. Sierra watched from the doorway, sometimes smiling, sometimes biting her lip as if still gauging my sincerity. Yet every morning, Hallie ran to my side, stretching up to hug me with tiny arms that wrapped around my waist. Through laughter and tears, we built a new rhythm. Hallie's giggles filled our apartment as we played board games, her small hands eager to roll dice and claim the first turn. I cheered her triumphant bows at preschool recitals, camera ready to capture each note of her shy song. When nightmares hijacked her sleep, I lay beside her, humming lullabies until her breath evened out. At every scraped knee, I knelt down, wiped tears with gentle fingers, and whispered stories of bravery and kindness to coax a smile back to her face. Of course, there were nights when doubt crept in. I wondered if I was enough, if my declared devotion could match the fierce bond she shared with her mother. Sierra carried silent scars of heartbreak and fear of abandonment. I learned to speak in soft reassurances, to mirror her strength with steady support. I made a vow that if Hallie ever questioned my commitment, my past failures, or my capacity to protect her daughter, I would stand firm. My seat at their table would not be taken for granted. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching stars emerge, Hallie nestled between us with drooping eyelids. Sierra's head rested against my shoulder, her fingers entwined with mine. In that quiet expanse, I realized the gravity of my choice. To love someone who carried a piece of another life, someone whose story began before I arrived. Yet in that moment, Sierra leaned into me with a soft sigh. "Thank you," she whispered, "for choosing me, for choosing her." I kissed her forehead, breathing in the night air, my resolve deepening. Love requires more than affection. It demands courage, the courage to claim space in another's world and the humility to honor their history. Every sacrifice I imagined seemed small compared to the gift they entrusted me with, their trust. As I tucked Hallie into bed that night, I quietly promised to protect her laughter, to guard her dreams, and to earn my seat every single day. In her peaceful face, I saw our new beginning, one shaped by chosen love, unwavering devotion, and the profound power of faith in what we could build together. From that evening forward, I carried my vow like a shield and a pledge. Every challenge would face our family unity. Every joy would prove its worth. I understood that earning my seat meant consistent action, unwavering presence, and the dedication to be the father Hallie deserved. When Sierra and I stood at the altar, I felt my heart swell with purpose. The soft clink of silver bells and the hushed breaths of our guests seemed to echo a promise in the air. I was committing to more than marriage. I was committing to a family already in motion. As we exchanged vows, I glanced at Hallie, perched in a front-row seat between her grandparents, clutching a small bouquet nearly as big as she was. In that moment, I knew I couldn't simply be a partner to Sierra. I had to be a father to Hallie. I resolved then to invite her fully into our home, into our lives, and into my heart. A week after the wedding, Sierra and I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight cutting through the morning haze. She passed me a folded letter. "They've agreed," she said, voice trembling. "My parents will hand over guardianship papers." My pulse quickened. I unfolded the crisp paper to see details of legal arrangements. Hallie would move in with us, with my name officially listed as her guardian alongside Sierra's. A surge of exhilaration and humility washed over me. When we told Hallie that afternoon, her initial surprise gave way to shy excitement. She nodded so solemnly I thought her head might tilt clean off her shoulders. "Will I get my own room?" she asked. I laughed, ruffled her curls, and said, "Every corner of this house is yours." From that day forward, I poured myself into fatherhood as if refining an art I had only just discovered. On weekends, I transformed our living room into a pirate ship, commandeering sofa cushions for sails and boxes for treasure chests. I learned which bedtime stories made her snuggle closest, and which lullabies coaxed sleep from her restless eyes. When she scraped her knee on the pavement outside our school, I knelt beside her without hesitation, wiping tears and drawing whimsical faces on her bandage to make her giggle. Each action was sincere, not for show, but because I believed that love was demonstrated in the small, steadfast rituals of daily life. When Hallie started first grade, I arranged my work schedule to pick her up from the bus stop. I clenched the steering wheel as other kids streamed by, until I saw her pink backpack bobbing toward me. Her grin, bright and unreserved, lifted every worry I carried from that day's code errors and meetings. She launched herself into my arms, testing how much I weighed, as if calibrating the measure of my devotion. I carried her inside, dropped her bag by the door, and listened patiently as she recounted playtime adventures, her gestures wild and gleeful. I responded with stories of my own childhood, weaving bonds between two worlds she might otherwise never know. 2 years later, our daughter Imani arrived in a rush of white blankets and baby coos. As I cradled her for the first time, I felt an immediate kinship, a gentle balance forming between two sisters, one born of my blood, the other born of choice. I vowed then that neither child would ever suspect favoritism. I set up dual college funds, one bearing Hallie's name, the other for Imani, contributing equal amounts each month. Whenever I paid a bill or deposited a check, I visualized two parallel lines of savings, stretching into futures I prayed would be bright. In quiet moments, I pictured graduation caps soaring, both girls standing side by side, each acknowledging the foundation we built together. As siblings do, Hallie and Imani grew in tandem, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in competition. I coached Hallie's soccer team one afternoon, cheering when she scored her first goal. The next weekend, I guided Imani's painting class, admiring her concentration as she dabbed violet onto canvas. I watched them laugh together at bedtime, gossip, and giggle tumbling through the hallway as they plotted imaginary kingdoms. I saw moments of tension too, squabbles over toys, debates about bedtime stories, but through every skirmish, I enforced fairness and empathy. I reminded them that love multiplies, never divides, that being a big sister meant protecting, guiding, and sometimes sharing your favorite doll with someone who looked up to you. In the mornings, I found myself awake before dawn, preparing pancakes for two little diners. I flipped flapjacks into the air, catching them deftly so they landed with perfect golden circles. Hallie and Imani sat side by side, sharing syrup and giggling over spilled blueberries. Sierra joined us when she could, wrapping her arms around my shoulders as breakfast chatter filled the room. On drives to school, we sang along to upbeat tunes, Hallie belting out lyrics to the latest pop hits, while Imani hums her own invented melodies. I realized that the house I once shared with two people now vibrated with the joyful chaos of four, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Of course, the path wasn't without its stumbles. There were nights when I worried that Hallie might resent the new baby, or that Imani would feel overshadowed by her older sister's established bond with Sierra. I faced doubts too. Was I overstepping by defining myself as Hallie's father? But each time uncertainty crept in, I reminded myself of my promise, that love could be chosen, nurtured, and proved through consistent care. When Hallie looked to me for comfort at night, I whispered, "You're my daughter," and held her close. When Imani reached for my hand in a crowd, I squeezed gently, affirming she belonged as much as anyone. In our family album, photographs captured milestones: Hallie's first day of school, Imani's first smile, beach trips where both girls built sandcastles side by side. Behind every image was a story of afternoons spent crafting memories, home-cooked meals, bedtime stories, spontaneous dance parties in the living room. Each narrative affirmed the truth I had come to live. Fatherhood wasn't merely biology. It was devotion, choice, and unwavering presence. Now, as I stand at the threshold of tonight, coaxing Imani to calm as Hallie recounts her school day, I recognize that the seat I earned is more secure than I ever dared hope. Sierra's trust, Hallie's acceptance, and Imani's unconditional love have woven a tapestry stronger than any vow. Becoming dad wasn't a burden. It was the culmination of every promise I made, every sacrifice I embraced, and every moment I showed up, fully present, fully devoted. In this mosaic of chosen bonds and sacred duties, I found my true legacy, the father I vowed to be, and the family we built together. When Hallie's teenage years arrived, I noticed the first subtle shift in her demeanor. The bright spark in her eyes grew cautious, the easy laughter more reserved. One Saturday morning, I found her lingering at the kitchen table long after her toast had gone cold, fingers scrolling through her phone as though seeking solace in its glow. I slid into the chair opposite her, cleared my throat, and asked if everything was all right. She looked up, shoulders tense, and said simply, "Jalen texted me last night." My heart tightened. I hadn't known he'd reached out. Sierra and I had agreed that as long as Hallie had a safe, stable home here, her biological father's interference could wait. Yet here he was again, a ghost from a past we thought buried. When Sierra came into the kitchen, I asked her why she hadn't told me about Jalen's messages. She bit her lip and admitted, "I thought I was doing the right thing, letting her have contact. He's still her dad." Her words cut deeper than I expected. I reminded her that I was the one who had been her father every day since she was 4, the one who wiped her tears, celebrated her triumphs, and tucked her into bed. Sierra's silence was an unspoken confession. In Hallie's story, I would always be the understudy, the stepfather. That afternoon, Hallie retreated to her room, leaving a void in the house that echoed louder than any argument. Over the next weeks, her distance grew. She closed her bedroom door behind her like a fortress, her responses to my gentle questions shrinking to monosyllables. When she once let me braid her hair before school, she now yanked away, muttering that she preferred to do it herself. The photographs lining our hallway, candids of laughing faces and beach trips, began to feel like relics of another life. I would pause at each frame, study the images, and summon the confidence that the love I gave had been steadfast. But the silence in our home felt thicker than ever. One evening, I knocked on her door and held up 2 cups of cocoa. She opened the crack of the cups, then looked at me with weary suspicion. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, voice taut. I swallowed, forcing calm. "Because I love you, Hallie. Because I want to be part of your life." She shook her head and stepped back, closing the door with a soft click. I stood in the hallway, cocoa warming my palms, and felt the sting of rejection. It was the first time I realized that love, even when freely given, could be refused. I tried other approaches. I signed us up for a father-daughter pottery class, hoping the tactile focus might bridge the distance. I praised her latest art project at school, left encouraging notes in her backpack, and invited her to invite a friend over so I could show her friendship wasn't a competition. Each attempt was met with polite nods or terse thanks, but no genuine warmth. I began to understand that Hallie was not merely testing boundaries. She was asserting her autonomy, resurrecting the ghost of her biological father to challenge my place in her life. Then came the afternoon I discovered the real blow. Sierra and I planned a family photo session, an attempt to capture our blended family in a moment of unity. I hired a local photographer, picked a spot by the lake at golden hour, and bought matching outfits for us all. On the day, I arrived early to calm my nerves. When Hallie finally emerged, she wore her own clothes, a ripped denim jacket and a t-shirt adorned with a band logo. She barely acknowledged my presence, and when I pointed out the color palette mismatch, she shrugged and said, "I'm not your sidekick." I felt my throat constrict. Sierra, shifting uncomfortably, shot me an apologetic glance but said nothing to intervene. The photographer called us together, and we stood in a loose formation under the oak trees. Hallie's posture was stiff, her gaze fixed on some distant point. I gripped Sierra's hand, willing a spark of warmth to illuminate the frame. The camera clicked once, twice, and then the photographer said, "Okay, let's try a candid, talk to each other about your favorite summer memory." I turned to Hallie and began recounting the day she learned to ride her bike, her grin so wide she looked unstoppable. But Hallie only rolled her eyes and said, "That was fun until it wasn't." The photographer's shutter stuttered as if uncertain. I tried again, softer. "Remember when I carried you across the finish line at your first fun run?" Hallie's reply was a cold whisper. "That's what dads do when they're paid to." Sierra's face went pale, and I forced a laugh to save the moment, but the damage was done. Afterward, I realized how deeply her words cut. A reminder that in her mind, my role had always been conditional, secondary to the biological bond she craved. That night, I lay awake, the familiar worry knot twisting in my chest. I thought of Jalen, picturing him stepping back into her life as though pulling a puppet on strings. I remembered my vow to earn my seat, yet here was proof that no amount of devotion could erase the allure of blood ties. By the following morning, I had resolved to confront the ghost head-on. I asked Hallie to meet me in the backyard. She appeared reluctantly, arms crossed, expression resigned. I led her to the wooden bench under the willow tree and sat beside her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said, "I know Jalen reached out, and that scares me." I paused, searching her eyes. "But I need you to know this. I'm not here to replace him. I'm here because I choose you, every single day." Hallie looked away, tears brimming. She said nothing, but her shoulders trembled. I wrapped an arm around her and waited, the willow leaves rustling overhead like hesitant applause. In that fragile silence, I realized healing wouldn't be swift. Daughter and father are not titles granted by marriage papers alone. They are forged through trials, acknowledgments, and mutual respect. The ghost of her father would linger, but I resolved to honor her need for connection while maintaining my own place. As we sat together, I held her close, willing my love to seep into her defenses. The wind shifted, and Hallie leaned her head against my shoulder. It was a small gesture, an opening rather than a resolution, but it felt like the first brick in a bridge between us. In that tentative embrace, I saw our next chapter begin, one where ghosts in the frame could become part of the tapestry rather than the undoing of our family. And though the path ahead remained uncertain, I knew I would continue to stand guard over my seat, ready to earn it again and again. I remember the exact moment I knew something had irrevocably shifted between us. It was the morning of Hallie's 17th birthday. I had risen before dawn, anticipation pulsing through me like an electric current. All week I'd researched the perfect gift, something practical yet meaningful, a symbol of independence and responsibility. When I saw the sleek silver Toyota Corolla advertised at a price I could manage without sacrificing our saving strategy, I knew it was right. I imagined her eyes widening, her grin splitting her face, the thrill of her first solo drive. I envisioned her calling me school mornings to say she made it safely, her voice bright. I pictured us cruising down winding country roads together, laughter spilling out the windows. That morning, I parked the car in the driveway, its curves glinting under the garage light. I tied a giant burgundy bow to the antenna and placed the keys in a velvet-lined box on the hood. Sierra and I stood back as the sun rose, each of us holding coffee cups, sharing a nervous excitement. I swallowed against the lump in my throat. "She's going to love it," I said, voice thick with pride. Sierra nodded, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "It's perfect," she agreed, but her eyes held an unspoken caution I couldn't decipher. When Hallie finally appeared at the top of the driveway, her bedroom door creaking open, I felt my chest tighten. She wore an oversized sweatshirt and leggings, hair pulled into a messy bun, still rubbing sleep. From her eyes, I called her name softly, wanting to coax her outside gently. She blinked at me, confusion flickering across her face as she saw the car. "Happy birthday," I said, holding out the key box. Her gaze snapped to the car, then back to me. The silence stretched like a chasm between us. I waited for the exclamation, the rush of joy I'd earned through years of devotion. Instead, she stared, expression unreadable. Finally, she set the box on the hood and said flatly, "It's a Corolla." No smile. No thanks. The words landed like stones. I opened my mouth to explain safety ratings, reliability, insurance costs, but her hand cut through the air. "Where's the Audi?" she demanded, voice muffled by hurt or anger. I couldn't tell which. My throat closed. "An Audi?" I repeated, disbelief lacing my tone. She nodded, brow furrowed. "The one Jalen promised me. The one Dad always gets his daughters." The word Dad left her lips as though testing whether it still belonged to me. Sierra moved beside me, placing a hand on my arm. "Hallie, sweetie, you know we had reasons," Hallie whirled on her mother. "Reasons?" she echoed, voice sharpened by irony. "You think I don't know why? You think I don't know practicality? Maybe you're cheap, but I'm not." Her words struck harder than any physical blow. I felt color drain from my face, thought my ears might sing from the echoes. I watched Sierra open her mouth in protest, but close it again. She didn't defend me. I inhaled slowly, clenching and unclenching my fists until my nails bit into my palms. Pain flared, not just at the rejection, but at Sierra's quiet complicity. My wife, the woman who once told me I had earned my seat, now watched her daughter mock my devotion. I looked at Hallie's folded arms, the tight line of her mouth, the way her eyes shimmered with a mix of entitlement and disappointment. I remembered the nights I lay awake budgeting for her college fund, the afternoons I coached her soccer team, the countless scraped knees and bedtime stories. Each act of love seemed to vanish in that moment, erased like chalk on a blackboard. "Let's go inside," I said quietly, voice steady despite the tremor I felt. Sierra hesitated but followed, slipping an arm around my waist. Hallie glanced at the keys lying where she'd placed them and stormed up the front steps. I turned to Sierra, expression raw. "Thank you for that," I whispered, bitterness coating each word. Sierra's face crumpled. "I'm sorry," she murmured. I thought she'd appreciate it. I closed my eyes, willing my disappointment not to become anger. "You thought wrong." Inside, the house felt hollow. I set my coffee down and ran a hand through my hair. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, each second a reminder of the widening gulf between us. Sierra hovered beside me, eyes pleading. "Can we talk about this?" she asked. I shook my head, stepping away. "There's nothing to talk about." I gave her my best. She spat on it. She reached for my hand, but I withdrew. "I'm sorry," she said again, voice soft. But apologies felt empty when action spoke louder than words. In the days that followed, I watched Hallie's cold indifference blossom into outright dismissal. I saw her friends poke fun at the cheap stepdad, heard their snickering when she recounted the Corolla story. Each retelling added weight to my humiliation. Sierra and I fought quietly in the evenings, her defending her daughter, me defending my heartbreak. We repeated the same arguments until silence fell between us like a heavy curtain. One afternoon, I drove past the dealership where I'd bought the car. A shiny red Audi A3 gleamed under floodlights, taunting me. I braked, heart pounding, and sat in the driver's seat of my own car, fingers grazing the leather steering wheel. I imagined trading the Corolla for that Audi. Could I afford it? Should I try to buy back my dignity? The thought tasted hollow. I realized that gifts, no matter how extravagant, couldn't guarantee love or respect. They could only reveal where a person's priorities lay. That night, I emptied my pockets onto the kitchen counter, college fund statements, insurance bills, car keys. Sierra watched as I spread out our financial plans. "I can't keep pouring into someone who sees me as an ATM," I said, voice quiet but resolute. Her face paled. "What are you saying?" she whispered. I met her eyes and said, "I'm saying that love isn't transactional. It costs attention, loyalty, respect. And when those are missing, no amount of practicality will bridge the gap." In the following weeks, I backed off. I stopped volunteering at her soccer games. I refrained from surprise gifts. I let her navigate her teenage world without my looming presence. Sierra and I rebuilt small bridges, shared meals, quiet talks after the girls fell asleep. I focused on Amani and my work, channeling love where it flowed naturally. Hallie remained distant, but I no longer felt invisible. I felt liberated, freed from the burden of unrequited devotion. Months later, I caught a glimpse of her in the school parking lot, sliding awkwardly into the Corolla. She stared straight ahead, brow furrowed, keys shaking in her hand. I watched from a distance, my heart softening ever so slightly. Maybe she'd come to recognize the gift I'd given her, or maybe she'd forge her own path of entitlement. Either way, I understood that earning love couldn't be measured in dollars or practicality. It required something deeper, mutual respect. And until she valued me beyond my wallet, no bow on a car could secure my seat at their table. The house felt different the morning after Hallie's birthday. Where laughter and bustling movement once filled every corner, now there was a tense hush, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. I stood at the sink, rinsing my coffee mug, the hot water scalding my hands but failing to warm my heart. Sierra had gone out for an early meeting, and Imani was still asleep. Only Hallie and I were awake in the silent expanse of our living room. I remembered a time when she leaped from her bedroom, chattering about dreams, bounding down the stairs with questions and excitement. Today, even her footsteps sounded like a reluctant admission she was still under our roof. I glanced at the front door, half expecting her to slip out without a word, and decided I would not be the one to chase her. I had tried so many times to bridge the chasm between us, to prove my love through actions, gifts, and unwavering attention. Yet each gesture was met with indifference or derision. It had become clear that every time I stepped closer, she pulled further away, preferring space over connection, silence over shared memory. So instead of blocking her path with questions or demands, I resolved to step back. I would stay quiet and let the emptiness speak its own truth. Later that afternoon, I heard the front door click open. I looked up from my laptop to see Hallie standing in the foyer, eyes fixed on the floorboards. She carried a backpack slung loosely over one shoulder, her posture guarded. I closed my laptop and folded my hands on the coffee table, staying exactly where I was. She didn't meet my gaze as she walked by, barely nodding in acknowledgement. I didn't call out to her. The silence between us felt as loaded as any argument, each heart beating in solitary rhythm. When dinner time came, I placed plates on the table for Imani and me, but Hallie didn't appear. Imani's small voice piped up with concern. "Is Hallie coming?" I offered a gentle shrug and a soft smile so that my daughter wouldn't sense the tension. "She's busy today." Imani sighed but nodded, and we began to eat. As we shared our meal, the clatter of forks and Imani's babble reminded me of the simpler joys I still had. Still, I couldn't ignore the empty chair facing me, an unspoken testament to the price of stepping away. That night, Imani fell asleep in my arms as I read her a story, her head nestled against my chest. After tucking her in, I retreated to the living room, where my phone lit up with a half-typed message from Sierra. "What do we do?" I took a deep breath and typed back, "We wait." It was the hardest thing I'd done in a long time. Wait and see if absence might stir reflection. Then I set the phone aside and turned my thoughts inward, recalling every moment I had fought for Hallie's affection. Coaching her team, late-night talks, surprise gifts, legal paperwork, countless bedtime hugs. None had been enough. Perhaps now, letting her feel the void would teach her what she had driven away. A few days passed in muted routine. Hallie's room stayed locked. Her car sat idle in the driveway. When I returned home from work, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Sierra and I exchanged weary looks over the dinner table, neither of us speaking, each offering silent solidarity. We found solace in small routines, clearing the dishes together, teasing Imani about the toothpaste stripe she refused to brush away, sharing half-finished mugs of coffee on the back porch. In these moments, I realized that stepping back didn't mean abandonment. It meant preserving my dignity and protecting the bonds that still mattered. One evening, as I watered the plants on the porch, I heard the unmistakable click of the front door. Hallie emerged, hair pulled back, eyes red-rimmed. She paused at the threshold, clutching her backpack straps, and stared out at the garden. I stood slowly, setting down the watering can. I didn't approach her. Instead, I let the night air fill the space between us, the scent of jasmine drifting around her like an invitation. She took a hesitant step forward and asked quietly, "Did you know Dad only shows up when he wants something?" The word stung, but I held my stance, meeting her gaze calmly. "I'm not your biological father," I said. "I never claimed to be, but I chose to be here, every day, for you." She swallowed, eyes flickering with anger and something deeper, hurt, perhaps, or regret. You chose me, she whispered. That doesn't mean I choose you back. I nodded, gratitude flooding me for her honesty. I know, I replied. And that's a choice only you can make. Instead of retreating, she took another step closer, as though drawn by the sincerity in my eyes. I don't know if I can, she admitted, voice cracking. Everything is different now. I studied her profile, how she had grown into a young woman, lines of tension around her mouth, the way her brow creased when she struggled to articulate feelings. My heart ached for the girl I once held as a toddler, but it also swelled with pride for the person she was becoming. We can take it slow, I offered. No pressure, no expectations. She nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a tremor of relief flicker across her face. In the days that followed, Hallie began to re-emerge from her shell. She left her backpack by her door, and in the mornings, I heard the coffee maker start again. One evening, I walked past the kitchen to find her doing dishes. She didn't protest when I placed a towel in her hands. We worked side by side in silence, but the silence was no longer painful, it was companionable, a space where words could find their way back when we were ready. I kept my promises to step back and stay quiet, allowing her the freedom to approach on her own terms. And she did. Little by little, she began to share fragments of her day. A frustrating test score, a funny comment from a friend, a snippet of a song she liked. I listened without interrupting, offering brief nods or questions that let her steer the conversation. I noticed her room door left ajar more often, photographs reappearing on the walls. I saw her drive the Corolla to soccer practice with newfound determination, parking it precisely in the driveway afterward. One afternoon, Hallie slipped her hand into mine as we walked to the bus stop. I looked down at her slender fingers weaving with mine and felt a quiet triumph. No, the seat at her table was not unearned. It had simply required a measure of respect and space, a reminder that love, once taken for granted, must be cherished anew. And in that gesture, I knew she had not only allowed me back into her life, but chosen me once more, on her own terms. Christmas arrived with glittering promise. I woke before dawn, straining to catch the hush before the household stirred. Outside, frost painted the lawn silver. Inside, the faint scent of pine and cinnamon drifted from the kitchen where Sierra had set up our decorations the night before. Imani's breath came in gentle snores beside me, and I felt a swell of gratitude for the warmth of our little family, until I remembered Hallie would be home from college later that afternoon. The thought knotted my stomach. By midday, the house gleamed. Lights wound around the banister, wreaths on every window, and garlands draped above doorways. A table dressed in white linen held platters of roasted turkey and ham, bowls of mashed potatoes, and pitchers of spiced cider. Sierra, effusive with holiday cheer, fussed over details while I finished wrapping Imani's last-minute gift, a sketchbook bound in leather. Then I stepped into the living room and placed a small box at each place setting tokens of love for both girls. When Hallie's car rolled into the driveway, I felt my pulse quicken. She emerged in a wool coat, hair pulled back, eyes guarded. She smiled at Imani's excited wave, but when her gaze met mine, I saw something unreadable. Detachment, irritation, or perhaps resentment. I swallowed and gave her a nod. She offered a curt "Merry Christmas," then drifted toward the mantel, where stockings hung side by side. Dinner began with laughter. Imani chattered about her college classes and new friends. Sierra raised her glass in a heartfelt toast, thanking everyone for being together. I listened to the clinking of silverware and the hum of conversation, determined to savor the moment. But the peace shattered when Aunt Liza, perched at the head of the table, leaned in with a conspiratorial grin and said, "Hallie, aren't you grateful to have such a generous dad?" The room stilled. I felt Sierra stiffen beside me. Hallie drew a slow breath and turned her eyes on me, icy and bright. "Some people aren't even worth calling dad," she said. Her voice cut through the room like a blade. I watched her words travel across shocked faces. Sierra's gasp, Imani's wide eyes, Aunt Liza's reddening cheeks. The air trembled with tension. Plates stilled halfway to mouths. Candles flickered, as if uncertain whether they should burn on. A tremor ran through me, but I forced a calm I did not feel. I stood and smiled softly, refusing to give her the reaction she sought. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Hallie," I said in a measured tone. I chose that word because it's what I feel. Sierra's shoulders sagged as though she'd lost a battle, and Imani's hand found mine beneath the table, squeezing gently. I set my napkin on the table and stepped back, letting silence swell. Without another word, I turned and walked away from the table. The soft brush of my coat sounded like a farewell. I passed through the living room, where the tree stood decorated in gold and crimson, its lights twinkling obliviously. My footsteps carried me out the back door and around to the garage. I paused at the hood of my car, its paint reflecting the glow of the Christmas lights, and pressed my forehead against the cool metal. I had invested years of devotion, sacrificed comforts, and opened my heart on countless occasions, only to be dismissed in the one moment I sought acknowledgement. After a time that felt both endless and too brief, I returned to the kitchen carrying a large box. Sierra looked up, tears in her eyes. "Where are you going?" she whispered. I met her gaze steadily. "I'm done," I said simply. She reached for me, but I folded the box in her direction and said, "Everything I bought Hallie is here." Inside were her birthday gifts, college fund deeds, and reminders of my presence, my love rendered tangible. Sierra's expression swam with horror and regret. I walked out again, this time to the garage, and laid the box on the floor beside the Corolla. I turned the engine off and left the door ajar, listening as Sierra's footsteps followed me. She caught up just as I climbed atop the car's hood. "Please," she said, voice cracking, "don't do this." I looked at her, pain and resolve warring in my eyes. "I can't stay where I'm not wanted," I answered. "Not today, not ever again if this is how she sees me." Tears slid down Sierra's cheeks as she reached out, but I held up a hand. "I love Hallie," I added quietly, "and I love you. But love isn't a silent contract. It's earned every day." Tonight, that lesson was clear. I slid off the hood, closed the box lid, and walked back inside. I steered clear of the dining room, where the family sat frozen in stunned silence. Instead, I went upstairs, packed a small bag, and left it by the front door. Sierra found me there, paused between us heavy. She didn't speak. Early the next morning, I slipped out with Imani before dawn. I held her close in the car, feeling her small body tremble. "Where are we going?" she asked, voice sleepy. I brushed her hair back and said, "Somewhere we can heal." I wasn't sure where that would be, only that I needed space to remember the worth of my love. Imani nodded and closed her eyes, and as we drove away, I felt both the ache of loss and the fragile hope that, just maybe, removing myself from the scene would teach them the cost of dismissing the man who gave them everything. I didn't sleep that night. After the laughter died down and the last of the candles sputtered out, I slipped from the bedroom and sat at my desk, the soft glow of my laptop illuminating folders of bills, statements, and photos. I stared at the screen for a long moment, mind spinning with disbelief. How easily years of devotion could be dismissed by a few cruel words. My finger hovered over the trackpad as I summoned the online portal for Hallie's college fund. The numbers blinked back at me like blinking lights on a dashboard. A balance of $110,000, the fruit of my steady contributions since her 7th birthday. I felt the weight of every deposit, every birthday, Christmas, and bonus check pressed into that figure. And I realized that investment had become a symbol of unwarranted entitlement rather than gratitude. Without hesitation, I navigated the transfer interface, selecting Imani's fund as the recipient. I watched the confirmation screen flicker. Transfer complete. $110,000. My sacrifice for Hallie's future, now secured Imani's dreams alone. I closed the laptop, chest heaving, and stood. The house lay in deep silence, walls still tinged with the echo of holiday tension. I made my way down the hallway and into the garage, where boxes and bags held every gift I'd ever given Hallie. Jewelry she never wore. Electronics she had either broken or ignored. Photographs I'd taken of her first day of kindergarten and her science fair triumph. I assembled them all in a large plastic bin, sealing it with a finality that sent a shiver through me. In the morning, Sierra stirred to find me loading the bin into the back of our SUV. She blinked at the scene, confusion lining her features. "What are you doing?" she whispered, voice thick with exhaustion and worry. I met her gaze without flinching. "I'm returning what she never valued," I said softly. Every gift I gave her, every token of my love, she saw as a transaction. It's time she understood the cost of her contempt. Her eyes welled with tears, and for a moment she reached out, as though to stop me. But I gently removed her hand and closed the hatch, the thunk echoing like a verdict. Later that day, I blocked Hallie on every platform: phone, email, social media. No calls, no messages, no digital breadcrumbs that could betray my whereabouts. It wasn't spite that fueled me, but a stark clarity. I would no longer occupy a role she mocked. As I stood in the empty house, I felt a shifting tide beneath my feet. The smell of pine from the Christmas tree mingled with the summer heat drifting through an open window. I closed the door to my office, offering a silent apology to the ghosts of our memories, the laughter that once filled these rooms, the bedtime stories whispered under soft lamplight, the proud cheers at school recitals. All of it condensed into a quiet ache that throbbed behind my ribs. When Sierra asked if I was okay, I simply told her, "Don't ever let her call me Dad again." My words hung in the air like frost on a window pane, cold, beautiful, and irrevocable. She looked away, unable or unwilling to meet the finality in my eyes. I walked past her into the sunlit living room and carried the bin of gifts to the garage. Each step felt both an end and a beginning, the end of blind forgiveness, and the beginning of guarding my heart. I arranged the bin beside the Corolla, her birthday car, its burgundy bow now wilted, its paint dulled by resentment. That afternoon, I sat on the hood of my truck and watched the world move on without me. I thought of Hallie's laughter, once bright and unguarded, now cold and distant. I thought of moments I might never reclaim, her college graduation, a father-daughter dance, the gentle, "I love you," whispered at the close of day. I felt sorrow, yes, but also a deep sense of peace. For too long, I had given without condition, only to find my love lampooned. Now, in the quiet aftermath, I knew my worth was not measured by her approval, but by the love I freely offered to those who valued it. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the driveway gold, I realized I was no longer broken. I was simply choosing where to invest my heart's currency, with eyes wide open and a seat reclaimed by self-respect. In the weeks after I withdrew, news trickled back of Hallie's new life with Jalen. Sierra's voice haunted the halls as she relayed whispered updates. His wife, Shay, resenting a teenager thrust into their routines, the cramped apartment where Hallie's belongings crowded a single corner, the broken promises of an Audi that never arrived. Each detail landed like a stone in my chest, but the sharpest blow came when I overheard a phone call in the living room. Hallie's voice trembled. "I thought I'd be happy here, but it's just more hell." I didn't feel triumphant, only a sorrow that cut deeper than any argument. That day, I sat on the porch, the autumn sun slanting across the boards as I traced grain patterns with my fingertips. Memories flickered, the joy in her laughter when she first called me Dad, the pride in her eyes at our beach trips, the quiet trust as she drifted to sleep in my arms. I realized protecting her meant more than providing. It meant being consistent through her worst mistakes. By stepping away, I'd forced clarity, but I feared the lesson came at too steep a cost. When Sierra found me there, she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "She misses you," she said softly. I nodded, awareness settling like dusk. The fantasy of effortless belonging had evaporated. In its place stood the truth. Love isn't a guarantee. It must be earned and re-earned. I inhaled the crisp air, resolved that if Hallie returned, she'd find a father ready to accept her again. But only after she proved she valued the seat she once so casually erased. A dull ache settled in my chest the morning Sierra and Imani approached me together. They found me in the study, leafing through old photo albums. Imani's eyes were wide, hopeful. Sierra's conflicted, apologetic. "Dad," Imani began, voice trembling. "Can Hallie come back?" I set the album aside and drew a steady breath. The question felt like a tremor underfoot, threatening to collapse the walls I'd built. Sierra reached for my hand, and I felt the weight of her unspoken plea. Forgive her daughter. I looked at Imani's earnest face, then at Sierra's gentle nod, and understood this moment required clarity rather than impulse. "The door is open," I said, carefully choosing each word. "She's welcome to return home." I paused, tracing a line in the grain of the desk. But the seat she burned at my table, that's gone. Silence stretched as they absorbed my meaning. I wanted them to grasp that forgiveness wasn't synonymous with erasing the past, and reconciliation demanded more than remorse. Weeks later, Hallie stood at the threshold, the years of distance etched into her slender frame. Her voice wavered as she said, "I made a mistake." I studied the tentative plea in her eyes, the same eyes that once glimmered with entitlement, now clouded with regret. I gestured toward the living room. "You can stay," I replied, "but not as my daughter." The words landed like the final stroke of a painter's brush, complete, irrevocable. Her shoulders slumped. She closed the door behind her with a quiet click that echoed through the house. In the days that followed, Hallie found her own space, unpacking the box I had left in the garage, placing a single photograph of us on her dresser, and settling into a corner of the dining table. She didn't call me Dad. Instead, she greeted me with a cautious nod and lingering glances that asked whether I still cared. I offered polite conversation at breakfast and listened when she spoke of college applications, resisting the urge to micromanage. When she needed help with car insurance, I guided her through the forms, keeping my tone neutral, my encouragement firm but measured. I watched her shrink back at every gesture of kindness, as though expecting me to vanish again. Yet, each time she lingered in my presence, I felt a spark of hope. Perhaps one day, she would truly earn her place, earning not only forgiveness, but the right to call me Dad again. Until then, I remained vigilant, open-hearted, yet unyielding in the lessons she had taught me about respect, loyalty, and the price of a seat left vacant. The morning light filtered through our bedroom curtains in soft, honeyed beams as I lay awake, contemplating the changes that had taken root in our home. I listened to the measured breaths of Amani's sleep, her steady rhythm a comfort I'd earned long ago. Across the hall, Hallie's side of the house was quiet, save for the muffled hum of her alarm, signaling that she was up and facing her new reality. Today marked the final chapter of our shared journey as father and daughter, or, more accurately, as something in between. I rose and donned my worn leather jacket, running a hand over its frayed collar. The jacket had once been a silent witness to birthdays, soccer games, and late-night talks. Now it carried the weight of lessons learned and boundaries redrawn. In the kitchen, I found Sierra sipping coffee, eyes distant but determined. Behind her, the calendar hung with neat handwriting. Hallie moves back, written in black ink, days erased and rewritten until the date had taken on too much significance. We exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Regret for the pain, yet relief that honesty had steered us here. As I prepared breakfast, Hallie emerged from her room, her posture tentative. She wore a plain sweatshirt and jeans, hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in a statement of defiance. When she saw the eggs and toast arranged on the table, she paused, gaze settling on the empty chair beside mine. I held her silent invitation in my eyes, making space, yet not leaning in too far. She sat down with a breath that carried the weight of months, picking at the edge of her plate, as if testing whether the place was real or an illusion. "Morning," I said, voice steady. It was both greeting and offering. I was here, ready but waiting. She nodded, and a moment of fragile quiet bloomed between us. Then she lifted her head, as meeting mine with an honesty that made my heart tighten. "Thank you for letting me come back," she said softly. Those words had the earnestness of someone rediscovering a long-lost path. I slid her plate forward and offered a slice of toast. "You're welcome," I replied. I meant what I said. The door was open. My words were simple, yet they carried the gravity of a vow kept. I had pledged a chance, not a guarantee, and now she was standing at that threshold. Hallie's gaze dropped to her hands, fingers tracing the wood grain of the table. "I know I hurt you," she continued, voice cracking. "I took your love for granted." The admission landed with heavy sincerity. I remembered my own vows, words spoken at another altar, promising to honor and cherish. Now I found myself in the role of forgiver, prepared to rebuild trust stone by stone. Breakfast ended in quiet companionship, neither rushed nor strained. Afterwards, I offered to drive her to her first day back at college campus. As we walked out to the car, Sierra hugged us both, the three of us forming an imperfect but hopeful triangle. In the driveway, Hallie paused before the Corolla, her hand hovering over the door handle. I waited, resisting the urge to coach or correct. When she turned, her eyes met mine. "I'll take good care of her," she said, voice firm. It was a promise I both feared and cherished. Fearful because it meant she still had a choice, cherished because she chose to assert responsibility over entitlement. The drive was filled with tentative conversation, shared memories of beach days, updates on mutual friends, and reflections on mistakes made and lessons learned. I marveled at how our relationship had shifted from father and daughter by legal decree to stepfather and stepdaughter lost in conflict, to, perhaps now, something closer to real kinship. The road stretched before us, winding through trees painted in autumn gold, and I realized that fatherhood was not a destination but a journey, one defined by presence, accountability, and the willingness to keep trying. even after the deepest wounds. When we reached campus, Hallie gathered her books and turned to me. For a beat, I feared history would repeat itself. The rejection, the shift of loyalty, but instead she reached out, pressing a folded note into my hand. "Read this later," she said, offering a half-smile. Her vulnerability was a gift I accepted with care. I watched as she walked toward the dorms, her steps steady, eyes forward, carrying the lessons of our past into the promise of her future. Back at home, I sat at my desk and opened Hallie's note. She had written about gratitude for second chances, acknowledgement of the love I'd given, and a determination to earn the title I once held. Tears blurred my vision as I folded the note and placed it in my pocket, a tangible reminder that bonds reforge when both parties commit to growth. Imani bounded in for a midday snack, her chatter filling the house with laughter, and Sierra joined us with a plan for family game night. The rhythms of our home resumed, enriched by a deeper understanding of one another. That evening, as we gathered around the fireplace, I reflected on the tapestry of our family's story. From the day I earned my seat, through trials of acceptance and rejection, to this moment of fragile reconciliation, Sierra leaned against me, and Hallie curled up on the rug with Imani, forming a circle of warmth. I realized then that fatherhood transcended DNA. It was woven through choice, consistency, and the courage to both give and withhold love until it was valued. In the glow of the firelight, I reached out and placed a hand on Hallie's shoulder. She looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes, and I whispered, "I'm proud of you." Her smile was small but luminous, a beacon of what we could become. And in that gentle exchange, I understood that the seat at my table had not only been reclaimed, but expanded by the lessons we'd learned together. Fatherhood was no longer a title I granted freely. It was a bond she had chosen, and one I would honor so long as we both held the space with respect, loyalty, and love.